Headlines on Global Business. Chinese Premier Li Qiang is on a three-day visit to France to strengthen economic cooperation and bilateral ties. U.S. Federal Chair Jerome Powell warns the U.S. may need to raise rates again to lower inflation. And we look at some of the most exciting consumption trends of the Dragon Boat Festival, which is also celebrated across the world. Hello, welcome to this edition of Global Business. I'm Zhu Jufeng in Beijing. Chinese Premier Li Qiang is on a three-day state visit to France, where he will attend and deliver a speech at the summit for a new global financing pact. Premier Li said China-France relations have maintained a high level of development. He added that China is willing to work with France on further cooperation in resilient supply chains and people-to-people exchanges. During his visit, the Chinese premier is also scheduled to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron and Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne. He met with French business leaders to strengthen cooperation in innovation and improve the business environment for both sides. Premier Li also visited the Schneider Electric Innovation Hub, emphasizing the benefits of its achievements in China. France is one of China's biggest trading partners in the EU. Despite the pandemic, bilateral trade broke the 100 billion euro benchmark for the first time last year, up nearly 15% from 2021. Within the EU, France ranked second in terms of exports to China and came in fourth, receiving exports from China. China provides the most investment to France among all Asian countries, mainly in transportation infrastructure, electronic equipment and automaking. France ranks third among all EU countries in investment to China. France had set up more than 6,000 companies in China at the end of 2021, mainly in aerospace, automobiles, electronics and capital manufacturing. And China National Offshore Oil Corporation and Total Energies of France have successfully finalized an inaugural liquefied natural gas purchase transaction settled in RMB. The transaction involved the acquisition of 65,000 tons of LNG. The two countries are expected to expand cooperation in low-carbon drives like renewable energy, new energy vehicles, and developing biodiversity. Meanwhile, a few months ago, China's National Development and Reform Commission signed a statement of intent with Airbus in Paris to enhance cooperation. This came after the NDRC signed statements of intent with three German automakers, BMW, Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen. The NDRC also signed a statement of intent with German chemical company BASF in a bid to enhance cooperation in fields including sustainable aviation fuel production and utilization, research and development of new chemical material technologies. Now, Premier Li Qiang is also scheduled to participate in the summit for a new global financing pact in Paris, which aims to revamp the global financial system and raise significant funds to combat climate change and promote human development. For the latest on the ground, let's cross to our correspondent Ken Brown in Paris. Hello, Ken. Who will be there for this summit and what the aims are at this summit?
Yes, we're here live in Paris, about 5 minutes from here, just around the corner. The Chinese Premier Li Qiang will be on his way for bilateral talks with Emmanuel Macron in the Élysée Palace. Now, one of the things that will be really high on the agenda is this summit for a new global financial pact. It's a pretty ambitious initiative that is aiming at reducing inequalities and pretty much creating a new and more inclusive financial system. Now, this comes particularly in the context of climate change, the climate crisis, and many of the natural disasters that are happening around the world, particularly in the global south, vulnerable countries that are having to foot the bill. We've heard the word solidarity being used a lot, and essentially what this amounts to is richer countries in the global north helping out poorer countries in the global south. Now, last year, over or close to 300 billion of damage was done by natural disasters, many of those related to the climate crisis, according to scientists. We heard the head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, talk about how our current financial system is simply not fit for purpose in the 21st century. Now, we'll see a lot of political heavyweights here. Guterres from the United Nations, of course, will be there. We'll also see the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen, presidents from Latin America, including Lula of Brazil, Gustavo Petro from Colombia, and of course Li Qiang will be there. He's expected to address this summit on Friday. We also heard earlier today that the World Bank chief is expected to announce new measures tomorrow to help countries hit by natural disasters, particularly by including pauses in debt relief for vulnerable countries. So that is what many countries in the global south want to hear. They want to hear some practical solutions to these problems and how richer countries are going to help as we move forward and the climate crisis potentially intensifies.
Thank you so much for a report. Look forward to more reports from you. Ken Brown for us in Paris. The Summit for a New Global Financing is expected to bring together leaders from around the world to discuss and work towards achieving a number of key goals. Let's take a look at some other details about the event and its objectives. For more insights on the strengthening ties between China and France, we are joined by John Gong, Vice President of Research and Strategy at the University of International Business and Economics. He joins us from Israel. Professor Gong, 2 months after French President Macron visited China, how will Chinese Premier Li Qiang's visit to France enhance bilateral ties?
Thank you very much for having me, Junfeng. First of all, France is very important in China's foreign policy sphere, because of its relatively independence in its foreign policy. So politically, visiting France by Premier Li, I think is quite important. But furthermore, I think on the economic front, China-France economic relationship has a lot of futures, a lot of promises. French companies are doing great in China. And China has always been has also been a major force of investment, foreign investment in France. So I think the Premier's visit definitely strengthens two-country relationship, and particularly, Premier Li's attendance of the French-steered Global Finance Summit to address the climate change is a very symbolic and very important movement.
China-France bilateral trade volume jumped 15% annually to over 100 billion euros in 2022. What are the highlights of trade between the two sides?
Well, speaking of France exports to China, I think the first thing to think of course, is the Airbus. France has a major stake in Airbus and benefits enormously from the Airbus project. And China is a major buyer of Airbus airplanes. If you take flights in, within any of the airliners in China, it's hard not to run into an Airbus airplane. So I think, in addition to this, there's also other products that French products have been very popular in China, particularly consumer products, high-end luxury products. For example, when you visit the duty-free stores in China and other high-end shopping malls, you're going to run into great French products. And I think this is a very healthy market for France. On the other hand, I think we're starting to see more and more Chinese-made consumer electronics, as well as actually automobiles that are being quite popular in France. I think in that regard, the bilateral economic relationships work out very well for both countries, and both sides stand to benefit a lot from this furthering relationship.
Right. And what about bilateral investment between the two countries, China and France?
Yes, as I said, Chinese companies are increasingly making investment in France. There are those actually, very interesting high-tech companies that Chinese companies are very interested in buying, as well as these name-brand assets Chinese companies are very interested in buying. On the other hand, China's always been a major playfield for French investments in China. I think your program has mentioned, there are several areas that French companies are very strong, and they have huge hopes in the markets in China. I think particularly in the future in areas of pharmaceuticals, biotechs, and things related to clean energy and climate agenda. It's a huge market for French companies to participate in.
Professor Gong, last question. France is hosting a global finance summit. How can China play a role in international financial cooperation with the target of achieving probably new energy development and climate change goals?
Well, yeah. First of all, I want to say that it's great that President Macron is taking the lead on this issue. There's supposed to be the American side to be taking the lead, but unfortunately, the previous president was totally writing off this thing. I can still remember President Macron's famous speech right after President Trump's speech, where he said that let's make the globe better again, right? Remember that statement? And I think subsequently after Biden's climate effort, I think mostly it's lip service at this point, and with this conflict going on in Ukraine, I think the climate agenda is totally taking a backseat in Washington. It's comforting to see that President Macron is not giving up on this and is taking the leadership to organize this conference. So I think at least France is enjoying great support from China with our premier's visit to attend this conference. I think there's a lot of room for cooperation between the two sides.
Thank you so much for insight into this, Professor Zhang Gong, for us. Now, French companies here in China are helping Chinese companies work towards its climate goals of reaching peak carbon emissions before 2030 and achieving carbon neutrality before 2060. Lei Shuran finds out how China's carbon reduction goals create business opportunities for those companies.
China's ambitious carbon reduction goals have created new business opportunities for French firms. Gas equipment supplier Air Liquide has participated in and completed the construction of more than 70 hydrogen refueling stations in China. It was also part of the Clean Energy Guarantee for the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympic Games, providing hydrogen refueling equipment and technology for the 4 hydrogen refueling stations serving the Games.
China is the world's biggest consumer market, and it is the 3rd largest market for Air Liquide. In recent years, we have been actively sourcing renewable electricity to help decarbonize our plants in China. In 2023, we expect to source 1,200 gigawatt-hours of low-carbon electricity, an increase of approximately 120% over 2020. Over the next 3 years, we will install rooftop photovoltaic panels at our plants across China, aiming to reduce CO2 emissions by more than 5,000 tons per year.
Expansion of French green investment in China has also come to the construction sector. Saint-Gobain, a manufacturer of sustainable construction materials, has been doing business in China for 38 years, and this month announced the inauguration of a new plaster plant in Yuzhou, Henan province, to expand its business from the country's coastal areas to more central provinces.
Yeah, we have a lot of confidence in China, and a lot of projects are happening today as we speak. We have 6 new lines or new plants ongoing. Buildings represent 40% of the CO2 emission in the world. It's massive, and it's impossible to reach carbon neutrality if we don't reach carbon neutral building. And this is exactly the business of Saint-Gobain, and it's perfectly aligned with the cooperation between France and China in the area of carbon neutrality.
France was China's fourth largest trading partner in the EU in 2022, with total trade value of 72,740 million euros, accounting for 8.5% of the China-EU trade volume. During French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to China in April, the two sides signed nearly 40 intergovernmental agreements and business contracts in a wide range of areas including aviation, science and technology, education, and agriculture. China and France will celebrate the 60th anniversary of their diplomatic ties next year. Lei Shuran, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
U.S. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell insists the United States is, quote and unquote, squarely focused on reaching its goal of 2% inflation, but inflationary pressures continue to run deep. The head of the country's central bank was speaking at Wednesday's semi-annual monetary policy hearing before the House Financial Services Committee. He warns the U.S. remains very far off its target and that interest rate may need to rise to lower persistent high prices. Benji Haya has been following this session.
In his opening statement kicking off a 3-hour hearing, Mr. Powell laid out the current economic state of play and defended the Fed's actions to date. He told lawmakers that whilst inflation has moderated, now at 4%, the lowest level in more than 2 years, it's still double the target and that he's committed to getting there. The question is, how quickly? Because after 10 straight hikes, up 5 percentage points since early last year, the bank's Federal Open Market Committee last week kept interest rates unchanged. The move, however, was likely just a brief respite rather than a huge change of policy. You see, Jerome Powell on Wednesday clarified that he's simply decreasing the frequency of these hikes in order to avoid increasing rates higher than needed, which could slow the economy and risk a recession. It makes sense, he said, to amend rates but do so at a, quote, a more moderate pace, adding that as you get closer to your destination and find that destination, you slow down even further. In other words, there's more tightening to come.
Nearly all FOMC participants expect that it will be appropriate to raise interest rates somewhat further by the end of the year. But at last week's meeting, considering how far and how fast we've moved, we judged it prudent to hold the target range steady to allow the committee to assess additional information and its implications for monetary policy.
The response was largely mixed and largely partisan. Republican Congressman Patrick McHenry urged the federal bank to stay on course to eliminate what he calls this stealth tax on American workers. Meanwhile, senior Democrat Representative Maxine Waters believes the Fed made the right decision, she says, to pause. Mr. Powell's remarks also briefly touched upon the banking turmoil earlier in the year following a series of regional lender failures. He assured lawmakers that the industry is sound, is resilient, whilst also conceding the episode serves as an important reminder to address vulnerabilities and to ensure that regulatory practices are in shape. Benji Haya, CGTN in Washington, D.C.
Let's move to other news related to economic and trade cooperation from around the world. The UK central bank has raised interest rates by half a percentage point to 5%, its highest level since 2008. The largest rate increase since February is aimed at fighting persistent inflation. Meanwhile, the Philippine Central Bank has kept its benchmark interest rate steady at 6.25% amid signs of a trend downward in inflation. The Monetary Authority says it remains prepared to resume monetary tightening as necessary. And Turkey's central bank hiked its key interest rate by 650 basis points to 15%. It is the bank's first rate hike since early 2021, when it started a series of rate hikes in an uncontroversial approach that sought to curb high inflation. The US and India are expected to deep cooperation in defense and technology as Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi kicks off his 2-day visit to Washington. Modi was welcomed by U.S. President Joe Biden at the White House on Wednesday, where he met with Washington's two top business leaders. The Indian Prime Minister is expected to address Congress and hold a press conference with Biden today. Modi has been to the US 5 times since becoming Prime Minister in 2014, but this landmark trip is Modi's first state visit to the country. You're watching Global Business, more to come after break. We'll look at some of the most exciting consumption trends of the Dragon Boat Festival, which is also celebrated across the world.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Today is the first day of the 3-day Dragon Boat Festival holiday. Tourism figures are expected to rebound to pre-pandemic levels. Data from the China Tourism Academy shows that the number of domestic tourist trips during this holiday period is expected to hit 100 million. That's the same level as in 2019. Revenue from domestic tour over the 3-day period is projected to reach 37 billion yuan or $5.5 billion. Beijing, Guangzhou, Chengdu, Qingdao and Hong Kong are among the most popular destinations. Figures from China Railway Group show that from June the 21st to 25th, the national railway system is expected to see 71 million passengers with a daily degree of 14.2 million people. A passenger flow will reach its peak today with 16 million passengers expected. Box office earnings for new movies during China's ongoing Dragon Boat Festival holiday have exceeded 300 million yuan, over $41 million US as of 6 p.m. local time in Beijing. These figures were reported by the real-time box office tracker Dengta and includes revenue generated from both advanced ticket sales and screenings. Out of all the newly released films, Lost in the Stars accounts for nearly half of the total box revenue. The Dragon Boat Festival is also being celebrated across the world with various activities and customs. Our reporter Wang Qiwei shares with us the festival scene from Manchester, England.
Great attention, go!
Paddles up and making a splash. It's all about teamwork and staying sync to win the race. But for these amateur paddlers, many of them first-timers, it's not winning that matters.
It was really fun. We were pretty dreadful, but we don't mind because we learned a lot.
But for some, just staying dry turned out to be far from easy.
It may not be the multi-billion-dollar football match that Manchester is usually associated with, but this race brings a wealth beyond money. It brings social integration between the Chinese community and people from around the world.
Full of buzz and full of joy. I'm quite excited. I haven't never done anything like this before.
And steps away from the water, there's also plenty to do on dry land. Today, the more than 2,000-year-old tradition is not only about parades, races and food, but also a celebration of cultural identity.
We want to introduce the Chinese culture to the local people, for them to join us together to row in the dragon boat and to celebrate the festival.
The first Chinese settlers arrived in Manchester early in the 20th century, and they have left their mark here, with the city's Chinatown today being the second largest in the UK after London.
It's about the long-standing Chinese community here in Salford and Greater Manchester, their contributions over many years to life here in the city, but also across the city region, is many and varied.
The event attracts crowds from different backgrounds.
I enjoy it. I've done this event many times before, and every time it's great to take part.
I'm very excited about today's event, and I feel very delighted to show our Chinese traditional costume from different dynasties.
A good audience of people, good energy, well organised, everyone's here to have fun, and that's what it's about, having fun.
victory for the winners. But for most, it was the taking part that counts, with teamwork at the forefront of this multicultural day. Wang Xiwei, CGTN, Manchester.
Very joyful. A plate of fish is often seen at the family dinner table during the Dragon Boat Festival holiday, as it symbolizes an increase of wealth and prosperity. The coastal Chinese province of Fujian is known for its abundant seafood. It leads the country in the production of yellow croakers, abalones and oysters. In recent years, the province has been exploring more sustainable and technologically advanced ways to farm seafood. Huang Yue has more.
If you visit fish farms in Ningde, a coastal city in southeastern Fujian province, you will see lines of interconnected floating rafts. This is how local fishermen have been farming seafood for decades. Traditionally, the rafts were made of wood and styrofoam, which can become damaged with time. So it can be dangerous for the fishermen to walk on them, and the polystyrene can pollute the sea. In recent years, the local government has invested in upgrading the facility.
The original rafts and cages have been replaced with plastic ones, which are more durable and stable in rough waters. The traditional wooden cages could only reach a depth of about 4 meters, but the new ones can reach 12 meters. So the fish output has increased greatly.
Fujian's ambition extends further offshore. The province is working to expand marine aquaculture farming into the open sea.
Fishing is never an easy job, especially for fishermen living in southeast China's Fujian province for decades. Local fishermen usually work overnight, as that's the best time for them to catch the big yellow croakers, a local specialty. But nowadays, with the help of aquaculture farming platform, the burden of these fishermen has been greatly relieved.
When 59-year-old Yan Jiaqiang started working as a fisherman more than 3 decades ago, he couldn't have imagined using surveillance cameras for deep-sea fishing.
In the past, I used the small net cages in coastal waters, and I had to get up very early to buy bait. But now, in the deep sea, there's an abundance of natural bait such as anchovies. Using the monitoring system, you know clearly the situation of the fish and the water.
The veteran fisherman now works at an aquaculture farming platform called Mingtao 1. It covers 60,000 cubic meters of seawater that's used for fish farming, mostly large yellow croakers. This method resembles a natural marine habitat for the fish and is hoped to increase production profits. The platform is expected to produce 600 tons of big yellow croaker every year, with an annual output value of about $14 million.
The deep sea could be dangerous for individual fishermen, but now with the help of this platform, they don't need to worry anymore. We own over 300,000 square meters of marine area here, and we'll have more deep water cages, so we plan to expand cooperation with more fishermen in the near future.
Fujian's marine economy reached $140 billion last year, accounting for 1/5 of the province's total GDP. And it's an example of how high-quality development can help build a more sustainable and technologically advanced fishing industry. Huang Yue, CGTN, Fujian Province.
Such abundant seafood. Before we go, we leave you with pictures of more people celebrating the Dragon Boat Festival across China. That will do for this edition of Global Business here on CGTN. I'm Zhu Jufeng, and happy festival to you and your family. See you again.